Hi, this is Paul from Paul's Passing Thoughts. Thanks for tuning in here. So, what I want to address once again, um, the Protestant gospel is blatantly false, and I've been trying to convince people of this for about 10 or 11 years. Now, it isn't like I haven't convinced anyone, but concerning how elementary the error is, and I'm not criticizing, I fell for it for a lot of years myself as a former pastor and a leader in the church for 20 some years. So I'm not criticizing. I fell for it myself, and we can talk about that a little bit later, how I missed it and why I missed it. So I've really begun to think about where I'm failing in making my point on all this, and I think where I'm failing is that Protestantism is wrong on so many levels that I try to keep it simple, but what I'm doing is I'm attempting to explain in simple terms the whole big picture of why the Protestant gospel is false. I think I've always believed that I've got to explain how all of the different error in Protestantism connects to each other to make my point, and invariably that's going to lead to a lot of problems. So, what have I decided to do? I've decided to try to break it down into real little pieces, starting with the most basic part of the problem and stick with that on this part one. And so, um, it can be very frustrating. Like I said, I've been at this a lot of years trying to get the point across to people. And one thing that has goaded me into continuing to work on this is things like what we're going to discuss here shortly. Is this, for instance, this video by Vodi Bachman that is a or Bacham that is a excerpt from a recent John MacArthur Jr. Shepherds Conference, and it's this whole well, you can see it here, posted by on X by this John Root guy, who I don't know. He could be a great guy for all I know. But he says, here is the gospel of Jesus Christ, perfectly explained in 2 minutes by Vodi Bacham. Enjoy. Um, and so this little short clip is viral on the internet to much applause. And in fact, and this is, I'm not going to say it's scary because, again, I'm not passing judgment here. I fell for all of this for a lot of years myself, okay? But at the end of this message, um, you know, he gets a standing ovation from 5 to 6 thousand pastors out in the audience. And on the one hand, that's very scary, but on the other hand, I get it. Okay, so we're going to take another stab at this, and this is part one. And I really hope that I get a lot of feedback on the blog when I post this, and comments and input on this it would be very helpful. And I also hope to get Andy Young involved in this as well to help me out with its development. Now, I don't know how many parts it's going to be, but we're going to take small bites at a time, starting with the very basics. So let's get going. First, we're going to listen to this video, okay, and then we're going to kind of take it from there. Here we go.
God, in his goodness and in his mercy, sent forth his son, who was not born of ordinary generation, but was born of a virgin. Yes, the virgin birth matters. Why? Because if he's born of ordinary generation, he's born in sin. But because he's not born of ordinary generation, he's not born in sin. He's clean of sin. His record is clean. And he keeps his record clean. And he obeys God's law. And because he's fully God and fully man, he obeys the law of God on our behalf in his active obedience. And then in his passive obedience, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. All we like sheep had gone astray. Each of us had turned to his own way, but God laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And Christ died for sin once for all, the just for the unjust. And God imputes our sinfulness to him. And he nails our sinfulness to the tree. And Christ dies and raises again on the third day for our justification. And there's another imputation. The righteousness of Christ is actually imputed to us so that God can be both just and the justifier of the one who places faith in Jesus Christ. So that all those who come to Christ may enter in. So that all those who place faith in Christ might be saved, but not only saved, but sanctified, because he's the firstborn of many brethren. We're justified and we're adopted into the family of God, and we're sanctified, and as his children we begin to bear the family resemblance, and we're further sanctified throughout this life by the very same gospel that saves us, until one day when it's all said and done, we're not just saved from the penalty of sin. We're not just saved from the power of sin, but one day we're glorified and saved from the very presence of sin. That's the gospel that we preach. That's the gospel that we need.
Okay, so you listen to that. So over here on the right, we want to look at the points we take from this video. The crux of the Protestant gospel is double imputation. I mean, you know, all of these guys swear by this. All right. So first point, Christ was born of a virgin, so original sin would not be inherited. Okay. Hence, Christ started out with a clean slate. Right here on this first point, I could get into the weeds big time. This is a whole other conversation about Protestant error. We're not going to go there today. I'm going to behave. All right. We're going to focus on law. Now, in regard to passive obedience, he states, which is Protestant orthodoxy, okay, Protestant soteriology. All of our sins were imputed to Christ on the cross. But the absence of sin alone does not make us righteous. We must also have good works. Hence, active obedience. Christ kept the law perfectly, so perfect law-keeping could be imputed to our account. These are definitive facts that we draw from this soteriology. Then lastly, and he said this at the end, and this is very important, note, the same gospel that saved us sanctifies us. All right? But again, that's a whole nother issue. I'm going to behave and I'm not going to go there. We'll go there on the other parts. And I don't know, I'm back in school, I'm back in RN school, so I don't know how quickly I'll be able to put out these different parts. But again, comments on Paul's passing thoughts and input on this are going to be helpful. So let's go to the next slide.
There's a double imputation that we will look at later at the cross, where my sin is transferred to his account. My sin is carried over and laid upon him in the cross. But in our redemption, his righteousness is imputed to us, which righteousness he wouldn't have if he didn't live this life of perfect obedience. So what I'm saying to you is that his life of perfect obedience is just as necessary for our salvation as his perfect atonement on the cross, because there's double imputation.
Okay, so going to our next slide after listening to that. Okay, so what is definitively established about the Protestant gospel so far? Boy, are we going to keep this simple. Jesus obtained his righteousness by perfect law keeping. Okay, so yeah, it's very tempting to go into that. Did Jesus obtain his righteousness by perfect law keeping? Whoa, hold me back, hold me back. I'm then tempted to get into the weeds on this, okay? But let's just look at this point. Jesus obtained his righteousness by perfect law keeping. Then, second point, this active obedience to the law is imputed to those who believe on Christ, and this imputation makes them justified. All right? So, what we see here is that the law, obviously, irrefutable, the law, and in essence, the application of the law or perfect law keeping is efficacious to the Protestant gospel. Okay? Justification is defined by perfect law keeping. Okay? Now watch. All right? Here we go. Romans 3:21. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed as attested by the law and the prophets. Okay? And here is something else I could get into the weeds over. See where we get in a problem here by not focusing on the most basic and then doing little bites after that? Notice that it's the righteousness of God that's been revealed. That's a big deal because what's all we ever hear about? Constantly. The righteousness of Christ, the righteousness of Christ, the righteousness of Christ, the righteousness of Christ. Question: does the Bible ever really say that the righteousness of Christ is imputed to us? If it's technically God's righteousness that is imputed to us, why is that a big deal? We're going to talk about that in further parts, but right now I'm going to behave. I'm not going to get into the weeds. But here, Romans 3:21, we can reject the Protestant gospel out of hand based on this verse alone. Um, but now, so the righteousness that is imputed to us by God, and we'll talk at another time about how it's really imputed. I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's imputed by the new birth, okay? It's infused into us by the new birth. And we're going to have a lot to say about the new birth and how Protestantism defines the new birth. But at any rate, this is a righteousness that is apart from the law. And obviously, the Protestant gospel, the basics, the foundation of the Protestant gospel is clearly not apart from the law. Yeah, but Paul, Jesus obeyed the law for us. It doesn't matter who keeps the law perfectly. It's not a righteousness of the law. It's a righteousness apart from the law. Okay? Let's look at another verse uh, out of the same chapter of Romans. Therefore, no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law, for the law merely brings awareness of sin. Okay? Look at this. No one will be justified in his sight. I mean, these guys clearly say Jesus obtained justification by perfect law keeping so that then he could impute it to us. They clearly say that. Is it this simple of an elementary error? It is. Okay. And in future parts, I'll share my testimony and my journey about how I came to uh, understand all this. But spoiler alert, I became so disillusioned by church. Finally, I went to the book of Romans and said, and by the way, before I went to the book of Romans, I threw away all my commentaries. All right. And like threw away half of my library and all my commentaries. Laid out the book of Romans and prayed to God and with the intentions of doing a word by word study of the book of Romans, pretty much, okay, Lord, here's a sentence. What does this word mean? What does that word mean? What does this word mean? And what does it mean taken all together in that sentence? Okay? And Lord, I prayed, just help me understand what the words plainly say. You know, no distractions, forget everything else I learned. What do your words say plainly? All right? I just, for the first time in my Christian life, read the Bible truly for myself. And by the way, um, when you stand before God, who else besides you are going to be standing there giving an account? Okay, look, teachers can help you understand. Okay, and I get all of that, but what's all of this about them having authority? Okay, when you stand before God on your own, you're the only one that's accountable. Where's their authority at that point? Do you really think you can defend yourself before God based on their authority? Well, good luck with that. Okay. Um, you're culpable for understanding the Bible yourself. Okay, and we'll have a lot to talk about that as well. Um, and then lastly, righteousness or justification is not defined by perfect law keeping. This is what makes the Protestant gospel all wrong. Um, you know, we must have perfect law keeping imputed to our account from Jesus. Okay. And even though Jesus is the one that kept it perfectly, and we're not, it's still law based. I mean, by their own admission, Jesus had to get his justification through a perfect law keeping. One other point that I want to make, though, is what we're going to see as we go through these points. And no promises as to how quickly I'll be able to put these together. Um, but one thing that we're going to see plainly is this is just a variation of of the gospel that Paul, the apostle Paul, spent his whole life refuting. Okay? This is clearly a justification by the law gospel. All right? And I'll give Protestantism credit. They sure know how to put the nuances and the twists on it to confuse people, but it is what it is. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to being helped uh, and through your feedback on the blog. Have a great day.